There are moments when you walk into a space and nothing obvious happens. No one says anything. No heads turn dramatically. And yet something subtle shifts in the air, like a quiet current moving beneath still water. And you feel it before you understand it. The strange awareness that you are being sensed rather than seen, recognized without introduction, felt without explanation. And this is often where the story begins for men who carry an energy they were never taught how to name. Some men notice it early, others much later, but it always arrives the same way, through confusion before clarity, through silence before understanding, through the uneasy sense that life keeps responding to you differently than it should, that people react before you speak, that women in particular seem to know something about you that you have never said out loud, as if something unspoken is quietly announcing itself long before words ever try. This energy is not loud. It does not demand attention, and it certainly does not try to impress. It is felt because it is unforced, because it carries a steadiness that does not need permission to exist, and those who have it often spend years trying to shrink it, smooth it out, or hide it, wondering why being themselves seems to create tension even when they are doing nothing at all. Being a so-called chosen one does not feel special at first. It feels isolating, heavy, and strangely lonely. Because the world does not greet depth kindly, it rewards predictability, repetition, and emotional surface. And when someone walks through life carrying something deeper, something slower, something that refuses to rush or pretend, they are often misunderstood before they are ever understood. Women sense this energy instantly, not because it is seductive in the obvious sense, but because it feels safe and dangerous at the same time, like standing near a fire that warms without asking and burns without warning. And that contradiction awakens things they may not have words for, emotions that bypass logic and go straight to the nervous system, the intuition, the body itself. This is why reactions can feel intense, inconsistent, or confusing, why attraction may show up as curiosity, resistance, admiration, or even discomfort. Because this energy does not flirt with the surface. It presses gently but firmly against what is real, and not everyone is ready to be felt that deeply, even when they are drawn to it. For the man carrying this energy, awakening rarely arrives as a single moment of realization. It unfolds slowly, through loss, through heartbreak, through periods of withdrawal where nothing seems to fit anymore, where old ambitions lose their shine and old identities begin to feel like clothes that no longer belong to your body. There is often a phase where silence becomes necessary, not because you have nothing to say, but because you can feel how easily words get misunderstood, how quickly depth gets reduced to labels, how often truth gets reshaped into something more convenient for others to digest. And so, you learn to observe more than explain. Society has little patience for men who are inwardly led, who move from intuition rather than competition, who do not chase validation or define themselves through dominance. And so subtle pressure begins early, to toughen up, to numb out, to simplify yourself into something more acceptable, something easier to categorize and control. Many chosen men internalize this pressure without realizing it, mistaking suppression for maturity, emotional restraint for strength, and silence for safety, all while feeling an unnamed exhaustion that comes from constantly editing themselves, constantly holding back what feels natural, constantly sensing that they are living slightly off-center from who they really are. The signs are rarely dramatic. They show up in patterns instead, in the way solitude feels restorative rather than lonely, in the way superficial conversations drain you quickly, in the way you notice undercurrents in people that others seem blind to, and in the way your presence alone can calm or unsettle a room without you trying to do either. There is also the strange burden of being seen and unseen at the same time, of being admired for your calm while no one asks about the weight you carry, of being told you are strong while quietly wishing someone would notice how much effort it takes to stay open in a world that often feels emotionally careless. Women may feel drawn to you because you listen without fixing, because you hold space without performing, because your attention feels undivided and real. But this can also place you in uncomfortable positions, where projection replaces connection, where people see you as an answer rather than a human being still figuring himself out. This is where the challenge deepens, because being sensed so easily means being misunderstood just as easily, and learning discernment becomes essential, learning when to open and when to stay inward, when to offer presence, and when to protect your energy, even if doing so disappoints others. Awakening is not about becoming more spiritual, more enlightened, or more certain. It is about becoming more honest with yourself, about noticing what drains you and what steadies you, about allowing your depth to exist without apology, even when the world does not quite know what to do with it. There is a quiet grief that comes with this path, the grief of realizing you will not be fully mirrored by most people, that your inner world may remain largely unseen, and that your role is not to be understood by everyone, but to remain true to something you can feel even when you cannot explain it. Over time, resistance softens, not because the world changes, but because you stop fighting yourself. You stop trying to dilute your presence. You stop translating your inner language into something more palatable. And in that acceptance, your energy becomes steadier, less reactive, less entangled in how it is received. This steadiness is what people sense most, the groundedness that comes from self-trust rather than confidence, the calm that comes from alignment rather than control, and it is this quality that quietly invites others to either rise to their own depth or retreat from it entirely. Being chosen was never about hierarchy or importance. It was about responsibility, about carrying awareness without turning it into ego, about holding sensitivity without becoming fragile, about staying open without losing yourself, and about learning to walk gently through a world that often moves too fast to notice what truly matters. There is no final arrival point here, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense, only a deepening relationship with yourself, a growing comfort with your own rhythm, and a gradual understanding that the energy you carry was never meant to be proven, displayed, or defended, only lived, quietly and fully, even when no one is watching. As time goes on, you begin to notice that this quiet way of living changes how you move through the world, not dramatically, not in ways that earn applause, but in subtle internal shifts where you stop bracing yourself against life and start meeting it as it is, trusting that your sensitivity is not a weakness, but a kind of internal compass that keeps pointing you back to what feels true even when everything else feels uncertain. You realize that much of your earlier confusion came from trying to measure yourself by standards that were never designed for you, chasing definitions of success, masculinity, and fulfillment that felt hollow the moment you touched them. And the relief that comes from letting those measurements fall away is both freeing and unsettling, because now there is nothing to hide behind. This is often when the loneliness changes shape, no longer sharp and aching, but quiet and spacious. A solitude that feels chosen rather than imposed, where being alone no longer feels like absence but like room to breathe, to feel, to think without interruption, and to slowly reconnect with parts of yourself that were ignored for years. Women continue to sense this shift too, but differently now, because the energy is no longer searching for reflection or validation. It is simply present, grounded in itself, and that presence can feel deeply comforting to some and quietly confronting to others, especially those who are not yet ready to sit with their own inner stillness. You may notice that some connections fade without conflict, without explanation, simply dissolving as your inner alignment strengthens. And while this can feel confusing at first, there is often a deep intuitive knowing beneath it, a sense that certain relationships were built around an earlier version of you that no longer exists. There is also a growing awareness of how often the world speaks in noise, urgency, and distraction, and how little space it leaves for reflection, depth, or slowness, which can make your natural rhythm feel out of place, even though it is precisely this rhythm that keeps you from becoming hardened or numb. At times, you may feel pressure to explain yourself, to justify your quiet nature, your emotional depth, your refusal to perform or compete in ways that feel misaligned. But over time, the need to explain softens, replaced by an understanding that those who truly resonate will not require translation. The awakening deepens not through seeking answers, but through learning how to stay present with questions, through allowing uncertainty to exist without rushing to resolve it, and through trusting that clarity arrives in its own time, often when you are no longer forcing it to appear. You begin to sense how much strength it takes to remain gentle in a world that rewards hardness, how much courage it takes to stay emotionally available without becoming entangled, and how rare it is to move through life guided by inner truth rather than external approval. This path does not make you immune to pain, misunderstanding, or doubt, but it does give you a different relationship with them, one where discomfort becomes informative rather than overwhelming, and where moments of heaviness are met with curiosity instead of self-judgment. There is an unspoken maturity that grows here, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that allows you to sit with complexity without needing to simplify it, to hold opposing feelings without choosing sides, and to remain open even when closure is not immediately available. You may find yourself less interested in being right and more interested in being real, less drawn to intensity for its own sake and more drawn to depth that unfolds slowly. And this shift quietly reshapes your relationships, your priorities, and the way you inhabit your own body. Being sensed instantly no longer feels like a burden when you stop trying to manage how you are perceived, when you allow reactions to belong to those who feel them, and when you understand that your role is not to soothe discomfort by becoming smaller, but to remain steady in who you are. There is a subtle confidence that emerges here, not loud or assertive, but rooted, a confidence that comes from knowing your inner landscape well enough to navigate it without fear, even when external circumstances remain uncertain or unstable. You begin to trust that your energy does its work quietly, without effort, influencing not through persuasion but through presence, and that this influence is not something you control or direct, but something that flows naturally when you are aligned with yourself. And in this ongoing unfolding, you slowly recognize that the journey was never about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt your depth, your sensitivity, and your way of seeing beneath the surface of things. That remembering does not arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, in moments where you catch yourself responding differently than you used to, choosing quiet honesty over performance, choosing rest over proving, choosing depth over distraction. And each of these small choices slowly rebuilds trust between you and yourself in ways no external validation ever could. There are days when this path feels almost invisible, when nothing remarkable seems to happen, when growth feels stalled or unclear, and yet something inside you remains steady, a subtle inner grounding that tells you you are not lost, even when direction feels blurred and progress cannot be measured in any obvious way. You start to understand that the energy you carry does not need constant expression to remain alive, that it does not fade when unacknowledged, and that its strength lies in its consistency rather than its visibility, showing up quietly in how you listen, how you respond, and how you hold space for both yourself and others. This understanding softens your relationship with time, because you are no longer rushing toward a future version of yourself, no longer trying to arrive somewhere definitive, but instead allowing life to unfold in its own rhythm, trusting that what needs to surface will do so without force. There is also a growing compassion for the versions of yourself that struggled before, the ones who tried to fit, who numbed, who performed strength while feeling deeply misunderstood. And rather than judging those versions, you begin to see them as necessary stages of learning, each one protecting you in the only way it knew how. As this compassion deepens, so does your patience with others, even when they cannot meet you at the same depth, even when conversations feel shallow or misaligned, because you recognize that everyone is navigating their own internal terrain, often without the awareness or support to understand what they are carrying. At the same time, discernment becomes sharper, not colder, but clearer, allowing you to choose where you invest your energy without guilt, to step back without resentment, and to remain open without overextending yourself in ways that quietly drain your spirit. Women who sense your energy may still approach with curiosity or intensity, but now you are less likely to absorb their projections, less likely to feel responsible for how they interpret you, and more able to remain grounded in your own experience without needing to manage theirs. This groundedness changes the quality of connection, making it slower, more honest, less driven by fantasy and more rooted in presence. And while this may reduce the number of connections that form, it deepens the ones that do, creating space for something real to emerge rather than something imagined. You may notice that your inner dialogue grows gentler, less critical, less urgent, as if the constant internal commentary begins to quiet, replaced by a listening awareness that does not rush to label or resolve, but simply notices what arises and allows it to pass. There is a quiet courage in this way of being, the courage to stay with yourself through uncertainty, to feel without immediately reacting, and to trust that not every experience needs to be explained or shared in order to be meaningful. Over time, this trust becomes embodied, showing up in your posture, your breath, your pace, and others sense it without knowing why, responding not to what you say but to how settled you are within your own skin. You begin to see that the challenges you once resented were shaping you in subtle ways, teaching you resilience without hardness, awareness without detachment, and depth without isolation, even when it felt like nothing was being gained at the time. This realization does not erase past pain, but it reframes it, allowing you to hold your history without being defined by it, to acknowledge what hurt without letting it dictate who you become. And so the journey continues, not toward a destination, but deeper into presence, deeper into honesty, deeper into the quiet knowing that the energy you carry was never meant to be loud, explained, or displayed, only lived with integrity, moment by moment, as you continue walking forward in your own way. As you continue walking forward in your own way, there is a growing sense that nothing needs to be rushed anymore, that life is no longer something to conquer or decode, but something to move with, moment by moment, listening closely to the subtle signals that guide you long before logic has time to intervene. You start to notice how often stillness carries more information than action, how pauses reveal more truth than constant motion, and how your intuition speaks most clearly when you stop trying to drown it out with plans, explanations, or the need to appear certain. There are moments when the old urge to doubt yourself returns, quietly, almost familiarly. But now it passes through you differently, no longer gripping or convincing, just a reminder of patterns that once kept you safe but are no longer needed in the same way. You begin to feel a deeper respect for your own boundaries, not as walls, but as living edges that protect your inner balance, allowing you to engage without disappearing, to care without overreaching, and to remain present without losing yourself in the needs or expectations of others. This respect changes how you relate to power, both your own and that of the world around you, because you see now that true influence does not come from control or assertion, but from coherence, from the quiet alignment between what you feel, what you think, and how you act. There is a subtle grief that surfaces at times, not sharp or overwhelming, but tender, the grief of recognizing how long you lived disconnected from this alignment, how often you silenced your inner voice to survive, and how much energy it took to become acceptable rather than authentic. Yet alongside that grief is a deep gratitude, one that settles into your body rather than your thoughts, gratitude for the moments that broke you open, for the discomfort that refused to let you stay asleep, and for the slow return to yourself that now feels undeniable. You may notice that your sense of purpose shifts away from achievement and toward presence, away from proving and toward being. And while this can feel unsettling in a world that measures worth by output, it also brings a quiet relief that no external metric ever provided. People may still project stories onto you, assumptions about your strength, your calm, your role in their lives, but you are less tempted to correct them now, understanding that their interpretations are reflections of their own inner landscape, not definitions of who you are. There is a growing ease in letting things be incomplete, unsaid, unresolved, trusting that not every connection needs closure and not every chapter needs an explanation, because meaning continues to unfold even in the absence of tidy conclusions. You start to sense that your energy serves a quiet function, not to awaken others deliberately, but to offer a different frequency simply by existing as you are, one that invites honesty, slows urgency, and gently disrupts patterns without force. This awareness does not make you feel superior or separate, but humbler, more attuned to the shared vulnerability beneath different expressions of life, and more careful with the weight of your presence, knowing how deeply it can be felt even when you say very little. There is an increasing comfort in your own inner company, a sense that you are no longer searching for yourself in reactions, relationships, or recognition, but finding yourself in the steady continuity of your own awareness. And in this steady unfolding, the path remains open, undefined, alive, inviting you not to arrive anywhere final, but to keep listening, keep softening, keep aligning, and keep honoring the quiet, unmistakable truth that lives within you, step by step, breath by breath, without needing to name it or explain it to anyone. You begin to trust that what is unfolding inside you is enough on its own. That meaning does not always announce itself with clarity, and that some truths are meant to be lived quietly rather than spoken aloud, revealed through consistency rather than declaration. There are moments when you catch yourself moving through ordinary days with an unusual sense of presence, feeling the weight of simple things more fully, the texture of silence, the subtle emotional tones in conversations, the way your body responds before your mind forms an opinion, and this awareness feels less like effort and more like returning home. You realize that much of what once felt like confusion was actually sensitivity without context, perception without language, and now that you no longer rush to interpret everything, those perceptions settle into something calmer, something that informs rather than overwhelms. This calm does not mean life becomes easier, but it becomes more honest, because you are no longer fighting your own nature, no longer trying to harden yourself against experiences that are meant to be felt. And this honesty creates a quiet resilience that does not depend on avoidance or control. At times, the world still feels jarring, loud, misaligned with your internal rhythm. And on those days you may withdraw a little, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, understanding that rest is not retreat, and distance is sometimes the most caring response you can offer yourself. You begin to see how often people confuse intensity with depth, noise with meaning, urgency with importance, and this awareness allows you to move differently, less reactive, less pulled by the momentum of others, more anchored in what feels steady and real within you. There is a subtle strength in allowing yourself to be misunderstood without correcting the narrative, in letting assumptions pass without defense, because you know now that clarity cannot be forced, and that those who are meant to understand you will do so without explanation. Women who sense your energy may still approach with curiosity that feels almost instinctive, but your response is quieter now, less charged, guided by an inner check-in rather than external chemistry, allowing connection to unfold naturally or not at all. This discernment protects something essential in you, the part that once felt overexposed, too available, too open without boundaries. And as that protection strengthens, your openness becomes cleaner, more intentional, offered rather than leaked. You start to notice that your presence has a grounding effect not because you try to calm anyone, but because you are no longer internally fragmented, and coherence has a way of inviting others to settle, even briefly, into themselves. There is a growing trust in silence, not as emptiness, but as a form of communication that does not demand interpretation, a space where things can exist without being shaped into meaning, and where your energy rests rather than reaches. In this space, you feel less pressure to become anything else, less urgency to define your path, and more willingness to let life reveal itself through lived moments rather than future plans, knowing that alignment often shows up after you stop chasing it. The journey continues in small, almost invisible ways, through how you choose to respond rather than react, how you listen rather than perform, how you remain present even when nothing feels resolved. And in these choices, something steady continues to deepen, quietly, faithfully, without needing witnesses. Eventually, you come to understand that this path was never meant to be dramatic or easily recognizable from the outside, that its significance lies not in how it looks, but in how it feels to live it from the inside, in the quiet integrity of choosing truth over comfort again and again, even when no one is there to affirm the choice. There is a deep settling that happens when you stop asking life to explain itself to you, when you stop searching for confirmation that you are on the right path, and instead allow your lived experience to be the only validation you need, trusting the subtle sense of alignment that grows stronger the less you question it. You recognize that being sensed so easily was never a burden meant to isolate you, but a sensitivity meant to refine you, to teach you care, restraint, and responsibility with your presence, so that what you carry does not overwhelm you or others, but moves through the world with quiet intention. The energy you once tried to hide no longer feels like something you have to manage, because it has integrated into who you are, no longer separate, no longer exaggerated or suppressed, simply present, steady, and honest in its expression. There is peace in knowing that not everyone will meet you where you are, and that this is not a failure of connection, but a natural truth of different inner rhythms moving through the same world, each finding its own way, each carrying its own timing. You begin to feel a gentle belonging, not to groups or labels, but to yourself, to your own unfolding, to the quiet understanding that you are exactly where you need to be, even when the path ahead remains undefined and open. And so you continue, not trying to awaken anyone, not trying to prove anything, simply living from that deeper place within you, allowing your presence to be what it is, allowing life to respond as it will, and trusting that the energy you carry knows where it is going, even when you do not. If something in this message felt familiar, let it settle gently in your heart for a moment. You're welcome to like this video and subscribe too if you'd like to stay connected. If this message mirrors something you've carried quietly for a long time, take a soft breath and let it land. You're welcome to subscribe to Divine Heart Portal and like this video if it feels right for you. And if this energy resonates, you can gently share that by commenting "Awake"